Linguistics Behind the Scenes.
What you always wanted to know about language and how to explore it.
With Christina Sanchez-Stockhammer.
And Dominic Piazza. Hi everyone, welcome back.
Hi, Dominic, and hi everyone out there. Nice to be back on the show.
It's always nice to be back on the show. And Christina, I am no longer in Germany, but my learning when it comes to German culture has not stopped.
Very good. Mm-hmm.
I recently learned about like a children's character, a children's icon, Captain Blaubeer.
Oh, yeah.
Which
I know him.
To translate is Captain Blue Bear. He is a blue bear. What can you tell me about him?
Well, I mean, Blaubeer also sounds a bit like blueberry, and I suppose that's also the idea behind it. And, well, he's a captain, and he tells stories, and those stories are pretty fantastic. In German, we call that Seemannsgarn, which is like some kind of thread that is spun by sailors somehow. And that the idea is that this is fantastic stories that can't be true, but they tell them as if they were true.
A tall tale.
Mm-hmm,
a tall
possibly.
tale. Yeah. I didn't even realize that the name was a pun on blueberry. Brilliant. Captain Blaubeer, he debuted on a very famous German children's television show, which is Die Sendung mit der Maus, the show with the mouse, or as apparently it's also known in English, Mouse TV. Very famous show, debuted in 1971. I think it's very near and dear to you.
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, I watched it as a child, obviously, like most children my age, I suppose. And well, the mouse, I mean, is a cartoon character, and it's accompanied by a very small elephant. They don't speak, and they are always there in the interludes between different films that are shown. And one day when I was in primary school, we even had the artist who had drawn the mouse come to us, and I drew a mouse for him, and I gave it to him as a present, which was pretty cool, because I really liked that show. But the thing that I liked most were the so-called Lach- und Sachgeschichten, which is a tough German word, Lach- und Sachgeschichten. But it means basically fun and fact stories.
Oh, that's a much more elegant translation than funny and documentary stories. Much more elegant. Yeah, I think that was the original title of the show when it premiered in West Germany, of course, at the time. It's been on the air for a very, very long time, and I was having so much fun learning about this show. The mouse is very, very cute, and I see it. It's kind of an icon, kind of iconic, appears kind of all throughout Germany in different places. You might see the mouse.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's also educational, because in those different films, they teach the children and all the viewers about things like, why are there holes in the cheese, or how do you make a pencil, and these things. And it's really very nice to watch.
Yeah, exactly. If I had to pick an American analog, it would be tricky. But we had shows like, well, Sesame Street, of course. I think that's famous all over the world. Very famously includes puppets. And we also had Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, similarly educational. That one aired from the 1960s all the way up to the early 2000s. But this show, Die Sendung mit der Maus, sounds very cute and very unique. And apparently it attracts an audience far beyond its intended sort of, children's viewers.
Well, I mean, you would think that it's for children only, but it isn't. Actually, if you look at the viewers, you will notice that the average age is pretty high, and that is because more adults watch it than children. Because very often the children that watch the show, which typically airs on Sunday morning, for example, that is actually watched by children accompanied by their parents or grandparents. And so all of a sudden, well, when you have the whole family watching, then the average age increases a lot.
Yeah, apparently I'm reading here, according to the German newspaper Welt am Sonntag, which means the world on Sunday, if you will. They found that the target age is children ages 4 to 8, but the average age of viewers is 39.
Yeah, I mean, as they sometimes say, was für Kinder gut ist, kann für Erwachsene nicht schlecht sein. So what is good for children can't be bad for adults, you know? And so they have a lot of more mature fans. I think there's also a lot of adults who actually watch the show without any token children. So just because they're fans.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, what's good for children can't be bad for adults, but it might not necessarily be entertaining. but that's what's actually great is when you have children's media that is entertaining for adults. So I want to say Pixar, right? I mean, they're the masters of this, right? Like Pixar films, well, I guess they certainly are children's films, and yet they're full of so much. They're so rich in plot and story and meaning that is very clearly aimed towards adults that only adults could understand. Not to mention when they can ever slip in like a joke that only adults would understand. So it's enjoyable for viewers of all ages.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, if you want children to concentrate on what you have to say, you have to make it interesting. You have to narrate a story somehow. You have to get their attention and keep their attention. And so those little films that are educational, they're very, very well made. And actually, I was once in the very happy situation when I was a postdoc at LMU Munich to attend a training course, which was offered by the people from the Sendung mit der Maus. So that was really fantastic because we had Christoph Biemann, who's one of the presenters of the program, in front of the camera, and Joachim Lachmuth, and they told us how they make those stories and how they help children learn something through those stories. And then we kind of practiced applying that to our own teaching, and that was really, really very cool.
Oh, they kind of walked you through their process of how they design these stories to be kind of accessible?
Yeah, so we talked about ideas such as that, for example, you could have something like a question in the beginning that you answer in the course of the clip. So different things that make it interesting for the viewers. And then we kind of tried out to apply these ideas to a short sequence of content from our own teaching. So that was really very, very entertaining. And it inspired me to do some teaching with my own students about the Sendung mit der Maus, because I taught a class in which we dubbed a film from the Sendung mit der Maus. So one of these little stories which show you how things are made, etc. And it's a very nice one because it's about the scientific method, you know?
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, the scientific method, which as a refresher is, well, it's our way of testing and understanding the world. You start with an idea, a hypothesis, and then you gather evidence and you test to see if it's true.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they did in that clip. But perfectly suitable for children, because there was a girl and she had sent in a question to them because she had a handful of dice, and when she threw her dice into her bathtub full of water, she always got 4s. So all 4s, which doesn't make any sense, does it? Because, I mean, chance would tell you this is not possible. And so they tried to find out what that was due to. And so they tried all kinds of things, different people throwing the dice, having water in the bathtub or not, etc. And then they proceeded to look into those dice. And in the end, they found out, well, probably I shouldn't tell it here so that people watch this little film, but it's very interesting how they do it. And the nice thing is that we dubbed that together. So we even had a casting, and the students and me, we translated the whole thing. And then the best part of it is that the WDR, so that is the program that produces the Sendung mit der Maus, they put it on their website. So anyone interested in it can still watch it in English, at least at the time that we're turning this episode. So that was just so cool. And we're very happy to share this beautiful film with the world now in English.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so cool, dubbing an episode. I've certainly never dubbed any TV or anything like that. I know sometimes for some international shows, so like let's talk about like Japanese anime, you know, it comes out in Japanese first, and then usually there's an English dub produced, but that can take a few months for the dub to be produced. And so some fans, they can work a lot faster. They might produce a fan dub quality. Your mileage may vary when it comes to the quality, but they'll produce a fan dub. And I always thought that was the coolest thing, to produce your own dub of a TV show.
That's really cool. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we had a lot of fun, and I have to say, there was a lot of talent in the group of students. And we had a student; she had such a nice way of saying things. And one of the things, that we learned as well was that it's very important how you speak into the microphone. So whenever she smiled, it was really possible to hear that. So we always listened to the recordings, and when she smiled, it was so much better.
Perhaps she discovered a latent talent for voice acting.
Who knows? That would be cool. I would be very happy for her because she also had a very beautiful voice.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's very much a different talent than regular acting. Certainly, voice actors emphasize that. It's a completely different skill. Yeah, very cool.
I would love to do that too. I think voice acting must be so much fun.
It usually looks like fun when I watch the documentaries and like they're in the booth and they're just like totally like screaming and stuff and really getting into it, emotionally getting into it. Yeah, I can imagine so.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to use the body as well in order to transmit what you have to say.
Exactly. So that is so cool. So yeah, learning through laughing almost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's something that I find such a wonderful idea, that it's possible to have fun with something and at the same time learn. I mean, that's what I try to do in different things, like with the games and different things that I develop, that I do. But even when I was still doing my PhD thesis, I started thinking about this idea of, okay, how can you teach linguistics in such a way that it's fun? And well, I love comics, I love cartoons. So I wrote a paper about that. So how you can use comics and cartoons in teaching linguistics.
Edutainment, if you will. There's a portmanteau for you.
That's true.
Cool. Comics and linguistics. Yeah, the crossroads between comics, cartoons, and education. I mean, there are a lot of really famous comic strips from throughout recent history, which often had, like, beyond just being funny, they had like lightly kind of educational tones. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes, I think, is so iconic. And the name itself is kind of a joke. Like, the two characters are named after like two philosophers from history, right? Like John Calvin and Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, I'm especially familiar with because he's important to political philosophy. Like anyone who studies political philosophy learns about Thomas Hobbes because he actually had this rather dark view on human nature, and yet of course his name is lended to this very, very cute tiger character, imaginary friend, right? Hobbes is the imaginary friend of Calvin, right?
Yeah, I mean, Calvin is a little boy and Hobbes is his plush tiger. But in his imagination, they have a lot of, they live a lot of adventures together. Yeah. And then, I mean, when you see the scene from the parents' perspective, you just see the plush tiger. Yeah. But when you see Calvin's perspective, then he's a real walking tiger. Well, not walking tiger. He walks upright. So he's more like a cross between a person and a tiger. And he's pretty philosophical. So, so I suppose the name would be fitting. But, I started reading those as a child and I loved them. But it took me a while to get that joke, honestly.
I think there's a lot of jokes in there that are quite, like, I think they'd go right over the head of a child. They're rather deep, or they're like reflections on life, or often making fun of certain elements of adult life. And things like that. So, it's so much fun to actually revisit those and to see how much more you can appreciate. And that goes for a lot of things. Like I mentioned Pixar earlier. Like I love watching a Pixar movie from my childhood and thinking, wow, that's an adult joke. And that went straight over my head at the time. Like that is so funny.
Yeah, I think that's the best ways of telling stories so that you can have fun at different levels. It's just like with the fairy tales, it's the same thing. So there's some parts that you enjoy as a child and others that you appreciate more as an adult. So it works for different age groups. And with those films in particular, of course, it works. And I mean, those Calvin and Hobbes comic strips are just brilliant. And there's also different ones which deal with language. And for example, there is one in which Calvin tells Hobbes, I like to verb words. And Calvin and Hobbes says, what? I take nouns and adjectives and use them as verbs. Remember when access was a thing? Now it's something you do. It got verbed. Verbing weirds language. And of course, I mean, Hobbes' reaction is maybe we can eventually make language a complete impediment to understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a brilliant way of countering this.
I think we're well on the way. Yeah. That's a really brilliant comic, because what Calvin is describing here is literally a phenomenon in English, and one that has existed for a very, 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 very long time. English, has quite a remarkable ability to very elegantly verb its nouns and noun its verbs. Actually, very famously, Shakespeare is credited with coining hundreds, if not thousands, of words. However, my understanding is that many of them, if not maybe the bulk, were verbed nouns and noun verbs that he was using in a new or innovative way that as far as we know, had not been written before or done before.
Yeah, well, could be. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy in English to do that. As you said, turn a noun into a verb or the other way around. And I mean, if you take the word bottle, I mean, a bottle is a container that is typically made of glass that you fill with water. And you can also turn that into a verb, to bottle. But in German, that wouldn't be so easy. So it's not possible to use the word Flasche, which means a bottle, and turn it into a verb. You would probably have to say in Flaschen füllen, which means to fill into bottles. This is really very economic, so you really kind of manage to express the same idea in a different part of speech as shortly as possible. So that's quite cool.
Yes, yeah, and he mentioned like access. Like it was what he said, it was a noun first. I almost would have assumed it was the other way around. I mean, at this point, it's almost impossible to tell where a word started, which part of speech it started as. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to tell for someone who is not an expert. And I mean, I have to say in these cases, when it's about, okay, what came first, the chicken or the egg, kind of in words, I mean, I usually go to my favorite reference book, which is the Oxford English Dictionary. And there I will try to see if if we can say it for sure, but I suppose in some cases it's really hard to tell, because I mean they might have emerged at more or less the same time. But I mean that's something which is quite special in the English language. I mean, English has very little inflection. I mean, there's a plural, for example, of bird, like birds, but it's not like in other languages where you have all those different cases that make learning those languages so difficult. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I can certainly agree. Languages can be a lot harder than English, but having recently learned a lot about English grammar, I now understand English is also quite tricky. On the topic of Calvin and Hobbes, there's another strip where Calvin is taking a test. It looks like he's taking an exam, and the exam says, explain Newton's first law of motion in your own words. And he looks very alarmed because he probably does not know the answer. But then he has a brilliant idea. He proceeds to write down just complete nonsense language onto the page. And then he says, I love loopholes, which is to say, it's said to write it in your own words. And he has invented his own words. They are his own that he has created spontaneously. But of course, they have no meaning to anyone else. And exactly. I mean, that's the problem. I don't think the teacher is going to accept that loophole. Of course, she meant something different. And so this expression of explain it in your own words, this has a kind of conventional meaning. And so that's what you would expect. And of course, I mean, when you say in your own words, you still want someone to use the words everyone else has been using before and just rearrange them in a new way so as to express the same idea. And we can only understand each other if we use the same code. And of course, here the teacher still means express it in English, but it's not said. I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't say because it's obvious to us anyway that this is what we mean. But of course, in such a comic strip, because the author wants to make people laugh and reflect,
the expectations are subverted. And of course, that's a nice thing about the comic strips and using them in teaching linguistics, because all of a sudden you notice that there's things that we take for granted, and by having this unusual situation, they're exposed. And so what I usually do is I ask the students, okay, so you just laughed. So why were you laughing? And then they reflect upon, okay, what is it that characterizes normal communication? And so we can take it from there and then talk about a linguistic topic.
Yes, yeah, language only works because there's a shared meaning. That's what makes language is the fact that we have a way of communicating because we have a shared understanding of these sounds. They're just arbitrary sounds, but we have a shared understanding, and that's what makes language work. It's actually really, really brilliant when you think about it. And on this topic of your own words or inventing nonsense words, another very famous children's author was Dr. Seuss, who very widely beloved, extremely famous, widely beloved. I love Dr. Seuss books very, very much. I have heard at least one person say that one thing they didn't like about Dr. Seuss is that he makes up words. He makes up sort of kind of nonsense words as they fit the sort of playful rhythm and poetry of his work. And I don't know, maybe they think it might lead children astray, but I mean, we just said Shakespeare made up words, and he is renowned as maybe the greatest author in the English language. So making up words isn't the worst thing.
It isn't the worst thing. I mean, it shows creativity. And I have to say that those books, I mean, they're not comic strips or cartoons in the strictest sense, but at the same time, I mean, the texts are very interesting. They're very rhythmical and sometimes hard to pronounce. And when I studied at the University of Reading as a student, when I did my year abroad, I also did speech and language therapy. That was something new for me. And I found it very interesting that they used those books with the children to practice different sounds. And that's how I actually got to know those books. I hadn't known them before. They're not so common in Germany, but I have to say that they're just fantastic.
Yeah, you're certainly right that it's not really a comic or cartoon in the strictest sense. It's more like an illustrated children's book because the whole book is essentially poetry. So for example, it's customary, at least here in the United States, probably other places, but a very common graduation gift, whether it's high school or college, is the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And a famous passage is, you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the guy who will decide where to go.
Oh, it's very beautiful. I really like that.
Another one that sticks out to me is in Horton Hears a Who. I believe the story is that Horton is an elephant and he discovers a speck of dust, which he learns this speck of dust actually is a planet full of people. And he comes to care for it very deeply, I believe, if I'm remembering. It's been a very long time. And he says, a person's a person, no matter how small. And as a short person myself, I really deeply appreciate that sentiment.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, also Green Eggs and Ham, which is like maybe probably in the top 5 most famous. Well, maybe the most famous is The Cat in the Hat. But Green Eggs and Ham, there's a character named Sam. And he says like, I am Sam, and then he becomes Sam I am. So it gets like inversed for the sake of the rhyme. So a character says, say, I like green eggs and ham. I do. I like them, Sam I am. And I would eat them in a boat, and I would eat them with a goat. And I will eat them in the rain, and in the dark, and on a train, and in a car, and in a tree. They are so good, you see.
Oh, I love it. I have to say, I really love those rhymes. It's lots of fun. And yeah, so again, I mean, you can learn something about unusual combinations, for example, So again, I mean, in linguistics, we also deal with literary language, which is sometimes unusual. And there, I mean, that's a beautiful poem. Fantastic stuff.
Oh yes. Many classics in there.
Oh yeah, and speaking of classics, I mean, the Peanuts are also classics.
They are, and very near and dear to me. Very, very near and dear to me. Yeah, the Peanuts, I believe they originate, or at least the author of the Peanuts lived right here in the city where I'm from, in the city where I live. We have a museum here. His name was Charles Schulz. We have a Schulz Museum. We have an ice rink that he founded called Snoopy's Home Ice. And the accompanying cafe in the ice rink is called the Warm Puppy Cafe because happiness is a warm puppy. Although as a cat person, I like to modify that. Happiness is a warm kitty, but to each their own. I love the Peanuts. Every Halloween, we have to watch It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. We have to watch Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, Charlie Brown Christmas, absolute classic with their hilariously pathetic Christmas tree, but it's actually quite endearing in the end. Are you familiar with it, Christina?
No, can you tell me more about it?
Well, it's just this little tiny almost twig.
Oh, right. Like that Snoopy has?
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's like a tiny little like almost twig with one ornament on it. Or as the British would say, a bauble. as I learned.
Yeah, a bauble. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and there are also some peanut strips that lend themselves very well to being used in linguistics. For example, there is one in which you have Linus standing in front of a house, and he says, "Hi, Violet, can you come out and play?" And she just looks at him and says, "You're younger than I am." And then she disappears, and he stands there and he asks, "Did that answer my question?" And of course, I mean, as an adult, you might understand, okay, wait a moment. Yes, she did answer the question by not answering, but she said something. And of course, that is also an answer. So there's a very famous principle that governs conversation, the so-called cooperative principle, which was described by Paul Grice. And so the idea is that usually when we have a conversation, we expect the others to make meaningful contributions. And if it's not directly relevant to the kind of question we asked, we will assume that it's possible for us to draw some conclusions from what was said. And since Violet says, "You're younger than I am," well, you can conclude from that, well, for that reason, I'm not going to play with you because older children very often don't want to play with younger children. But of course, it requires a lot of world knowledge. And that's yet another thing, in the cartoons. Well, you can talk about the world knowledge, the background that is necessary to understand the situation.
Yes, this cooperative principle that I learned about from you, actually, on a previous episode. On a previous episode, we spoke about this. Yeah, and regardless of whether it was actually answering the question, it was a rather rude response, rather curt. This cooperative principle, I think, we always want to assume the person is answering what we're asking or replying to what we said in some kind of a meaningful way. That's why it can be very frustrating if a person doesn't, and they might have many reasons for that. Politicians, very famously politicians, they hate yes or no questions. They almost never ever answer a yes or no question with a yes or a no. And there are many reasons for this, right? Yes or no questions, they're very concrete. A yes or a no is very concrete. And usually politicians want to operate in kind of more of a gray area. If you say things very concretely, then you could get in trouble later on or what have you. But usually if they're not answering the yes or no question, you can glean, when a person doesn't answer a question, you can also glean a lot of information from that. You might assume that they're not answering it because the answer is not favorable to them.
Yes.
It reminds me of something I learned in my communication classes because I was a communication major at one point. Well, actually, I double majored in it. It was, you cannot not communicate. Even not communicating communicates something. For example, you don't show up to class. Well, you weren't in class, so you didn't communicate to anyone. But by not appearing in class, you communicated something. You communicated that, I don't know, maybe perhaps either you're sick or you had an emergency, or perhaps you just blew it off because you don't care. Well, we don't know. We're left to wonder, and we have to kind of grasp at the information that's out there to try and derive some meaning. And that meaning might not always be what you intend. So maybe it's good to align with the cooperative principle and try to talk to people in a cooperative manner.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually what we would expect, We would as a standard, expect people to contribute something that is true and that is not much less or much more than what we ask them to contribute to the conversation. And I mean, you have a lot of jokes, a lot of cartoons that exploit that. And I mean, if you think about this truth principle, I mean, there are situations in which you may not want to say the complete truth, and that is because you're being polite. And so, for example, if you're at a restaurant and the waiter asks you if you like the food, possibly you might want to say, yeah, thanks, it was fine, even if you didn't like it too much, because you don't want to be impolite. And there's a very nice cartoon which really deals with this topic. And in that cartoon, you have a woman in an astronaut's dress, basically, sitting next to another person, which is obviously Pinocchio, also in an astronaut's dress. And they are in space because you can see the Earth in the far distance. And she says, what do you think? Do you think I'm too fat? And of course, that's a very interesting dilemma for Pinocchio in case he should feel so, because you see he's kind of shocked because his eyes are open. And of course, the best thing is not to say anything in that situation, because if his nose expands, then obviously he will die because he can't breathe anymore.
It'll break his helmet.
Yeah,
he's in an astronaut. He's in an astronaut, a spacesuit. Yeah. Oh, scary situation. Scary situation.
Yeah, so the cartoons are often very good at revealing these things in a playful way, but of course they can serve different functions. I mean, apart from making you aware of a particular situation or allowing being analyzed, they can also serve as an anchor for memory. So I still remember when I was a student myself, I once had a presentation about prototype theory, and on the handout of the fellow student who gave that presentation, there was a cartoon of two girls talking to each other, or rather a comic strip of two girls talking to each other. And they asked each other, what color did you say the Martians are? Green. What sort of green? I mean, are they an emerald green or a pea green or an apple green or a sage green or a sea green or what? Well, I think they're a sort of greeny green. Greeny green? My favorite color. And I mean, can you relate to greeny green, Dominic?
I think it's in the eye of the beholder. Sure, I could imagine a greeny green. Probably just a very standard green. What is standard green? Excellent question.
Exactly.
And some kind of a neutral shade.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be extremely dark. I mean, it wouldn't be like a dark forest green.
Because that would be dark green or forest green,
Yeah, and it wouldn't be lime green either, you know?
No, that's like a light green.
Yeah, or olive green.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a shade that is really called a greeny green, but I mean, if you ask people to think of a greeny green or a true kind of red, you can imagine that. And that's what prototype theory is about. And there were actually studies in which people from different linguistic backgrounds were asked to show, like on a display of differently colored tiles, which ones represented like the best example for the color words in their languages. And they tended to pick the same ones. So, I mean, the conclusion that was drawn from that very, very famous study by Berlin and Kay is that the colors are not all equal. So if you have a rainbow, I mean, not all the colors are equally good, so to speak, but some stand out more to human perception. Some are better representatives of a certain color term. And so it's this idea that you sometimes have better or worse representatives of categories that are what prototype theory is all about.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I grew up with crayons, of course, and at least here in the United States, and almost certainly Canada as well, the biggest brand of crayons is made by Crayola. And what's really cool is the crayons on the label. It tells you the name of the color, and it tells you the name in English, Spanish, and French. Wow. Which I believe they do that because it hey, it's just a small way of helping kids learn words in other languages. But nevertheless, I bring this up because ultimately with the crayons, there is a crayon just called red. There is a crayon just called yellow. There are many different shades and they all have different names, but ultimately they chose their prototypical, this is red, this is yellow, this is blue, and everything else is a version of that.
Yeah, exactly. Everything else is a possibly less good kind of red. So there's a redder kind of red. Yes. I mean, I still remember when I was a pupil, I actually wrote about someone's face growing redder and redder. And then I was told by my teacher that this was not possible. You can't grow redder or more red. And I thought, well, but you can, and then it was very gratifying when I learned about prototype theory, because my 10-year-old me said, I knew it all along. Something can be more red than something else.
Yeah, you absolutely can grow redder. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Totally. It would just mean that you were already a bit red, and then the intensity is growing, which would mean, I don't know, either you're really angry or perhaps you're embarrassed and you're blushing.
That's true. That's true. That could also be the case. Yeah. And I mean, that's one thing in prototype theory, that you talk about the colors, but then of course you can then very quickly talk about other categories like birds. Birds are a beautiful category. I mean, if you had to think of a bird, Dominic, what bird would you kind of immediately think of? If I asked you, okay, what's a bird? Name me a bird.
Oh yeah, I would pick a really basic and common bird. Something like a pigeon or a crow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Probably you wouldn't pick a parrot.
No, because a parrot is a parrot. It's not prototypical.
Or a penguin.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Not one of the flight. I would not pick a flightless bird. Yeah, you're right about that.
So no ostrich.
No ostrich. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, ostriches. In German, ostrich is an interesting word. It's called Strauß. Strauß. There's another word, Strauß, which means like like when you have flowers. Is it a bunch of flowers? Yeah, right.
A bouquet.
A bouquet, yeah, a bouquet. Oh, yeah, so yeah. Strauß. But nice. So ostrich, you wouldn't pick an ostrich, right? Because an ostrich, it doesn't look like the bird that you think about. I mean, if you ask a child to draw a bird, it will most likely draw a small animal that is flying in the air, that lays eggs in a nest on a tree, things like that. And not a penguin that can't fly, not an ostrich that is huge, etc. Not a swan. Again, a swan is huge. It lives in the water like a duck, They're all common birds, but still it's not what you immediately think of. Yeah. And I
would not have thought of like a duck or a goose. No, that would not have been my first thought.
Yeah, and it's not just the birds that work like that, but it also works for other categories. Also for furniture. If you think about furniture, there's a very famous study by Elinor Roche in which she asked her students to rate different candidates on how good a piece of furniture they were, whether a table is a good piece of furniture, or a fridge, or a telephone, or a lamp. Exactly. And so it's the same thing. So if you think about
electronics as furniture?
Exactly. Possibly in the widest sense, but you don't really want to include it at the center. And so what we have is a kind of center of a category in which we have the typical representatives, like the dove, like the pigeon for the birds, for example. And then we have the boundaries of the category, which are fuzzy. And so at the edges, people may disagree and say, well, I think a fridge is a piece of furniture. And other people might say, and others might say, no, it can't be. Because
it's an appliance.
Exactly. So, but I think some students still rated it as, kind of a piece of furniture too. so there's disagreement. And again, this is a beautiful theory. And my anchor for remembering that is that comic strip. So that's also one reason why I use comic strips, because I think, the students might find it easier to remember what I told them if they think back about that comic strip or joke in which I presented a phenomenon.
Yes, yes, excellent. Yeah, it's not really a mnemonic, not in the actual way mnemonics work, but it's similar in that it's a tool for remembering something in a way.
Yeah. And the nice thing is, I mean, that there's something that you can laugh about in almost all areas of linguistics. And so, well, you just have to find it. And, well, sometimes I do find it and sometimes I do show that to my students. And, well, then hopefully it will help them remember things.
Excellent. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I'm also a huge fan, I have to say. And I hope that my students also are. And so I think the nice thing about showing them comic strips, cartoons, is also that it doesn't feel so much like academia. So it's a kind of little break from academic life, from university, in the classroom. So to some extent, that might also be more motivating in a way to kind of, have that little fun break in the classroom. But of course, one shouldn't overdo it, because if you use cartoons all the time for teaching, I think the effect wears off. But still, I mean, I'm a strong believer in having fun while teaching. And I think comic strips, cartoons are just a wonderful way of doing so.
Certainly, it's a great way to introduce a topic, and I think that's often a way that they are employed in kind of the academic space. There's a very, very famous webcomic that has been online for at least 20 years, maybe more than 20 years, which is XKCD. As I understand it, the name has no meaning. It was never supposed to have meaning. It doesn't stand for anything, and it's not pronounceable. In fact, I think specifically the creator wanted to come up with an acronym or an initialism that is not pronounceable. These comics are kind of squarely aimed at an older audience, often kind of a scientific audience, because often they make fun of, well, they can make fun of academic topics or academia or scientific topics, or these jokes that require a little bit more of kind of a knowledge or understanding, and I find them really enjoyable. There's also, as they say on the internet, there's an XKCD for everything, which is to say, no matter what topic it may be, you can find an XKCD comic.
Yeah, totally true, I might say. I mean, as a linguist, at least linguistic strips are there, cartoons, comic strips. And I have to say, I really love XKCD too. But for the scientific ones, I sometimes find them hard to understand. But there's a website which is called Explain XKCD. And so they explain what they are about. And that's also very enjoyable, because then sometimes you finally understand what they meant. And I mean, there's plenty of beautiful linguistics jokes. And I told you before, I even have one on my office door.
Yes, you do, because I've seen it. So that's the Tower of Babel one, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that one. But there's so many more.
Yes, there are, and it's very eclectic because he covers a bunch of different fields. The author, often it can be scientific fields that I might not be familiar with, and so then an explainer is very helpful. But I want to share with you one here, which is linguistic in nature. It's captioned, "I'm trying to do a shopping trip where I only buy stuff that's no longer made from the material it's named after. And the shopping list contains tinfoil, sponges, silverware, linens, iron and ironing board, reading glasses, 9-iron and 3-wood, sidewalk chalk, and rubber duck." Which, this is great because, there were some items on here, like tinfoil is made out of aluminum, silverware is made out of a metal that isn't silver. There were some of these that I knew, but there are some on this list that I did not know. Like, I did not know sidewalk chalk isn't made out of chalk anymore. I did not know that sponges are not made of sponge. What even is sponge? I don't know, but apparently it's not sponge anymore. No,
it's a plant that grows in the sea. So I saw it on my travels.
A sea sponge?
Yeah, like SpongeBob.
Wait a minute though. Actually, this is a necessary tangent. I had a biology teacher at one point. He had a background in marine biology, and he loved SpongeBob as any good marine biologist would. And he loved the underappreciated joke at the core of SpongeBob, which is that SpongeBob is not a sea sponge. He is a kitchen sponge.
That's true.
He's a man-made kitchen sponge, and he lives with a sea star and a crab and a squid. And whenever they do scenes where he emerges from underwater water, he's a yellow kitchen sponge.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. So real sponges don't look like that. I mean, they're not bright yellow. I mean, they are actual dried up plants when you use those. But I mean, like a rubber duck.
I think they're animals, actually, by the way.
Oh, are they?
I think sea sponges are living animals. Yeah, they're
gosh.
extremely simple. They are extremely simple organisms, but I believe it's an animal. Yeah.
Okay, you might be right. I mean, particularly with some of the sea creatures, it's hard to tell when they don't move too much.
It is. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
And I mean, if you think of the rubber duck, I mean, yeah, your first idea might be it's made of rubber, but typically it isn't. I mean, think of any rubber ducks you might own. Are they made of rubber?
Like a type of silicone, probably, right? Some type of
kind
a plastic material.
Some plastic, I would say, and not really rubber,
Yeah.
But usually we don't even think about that because we don't think about, oh, wait a moment, I want to kind of take that duck made of rubber into the bathtub, but you just think of the rubber duck. So the rubber duck is a concept as a whole. So most of the time we don't split that up. And that's how language works, that most of the time we don't even think about those parts. So if a word is frequent enough, then we just use the whole concept without giving it too much thought most of the time. Unless you're a linguist, then of course you might start analyzing.
Yes, exactly. That's the fun of linguistics. You take the everyday and then you kind of break it apart and you realize kind of how interesting it really is.
Exactly.
There's another XKCD where it's a marriage proposal. Will you marry me? And the other person replies, let's find out. And then, well, they get wedded and they say, apparently, yes. And this is pretty funny. Yeah. Will you marry me? That is the phrase. That is the phrase you say to someone when you propose. But if you think about it, it's a question in the future tense. It's just asking if the person will do something in the future. It's not asking if the person wants to do it, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's the modern perspective. But in the past, will meant something different. It meant want. I mean, if you think about German, in German, we still have the old situation. So in German, the proposal question would be, willst du mich heiraten? Do you want to marry me? So wollen is to want. And so what we have here is a fixed expression in the language that is kind of conserved as a whole and still used. But if you looked at it in detail, you would notice, oh, wait a moment, that doesn't really make sense anymore because it's something different from what you usually have. Other will questions don't work like that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was fascinating to me when I learned, because this will, it's an auxiliary, or it's a helping verb, right? Meaning coming from will, like to want, right? Because the word still exists in English with a similar meaning, but not used in that way, right? So if you do something against someone's will, you do it against their wishes, or
That's
if you have a will, right?
True.
Which is your document where when you eventually pass away, it dictates how your belongings will be distributed to your loved ones and such. It's what you want. It's your will.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So it still has that related meaning, but as a helping verb, it's been so thoroughly kind of sanitized and scrubbed of that meaning that I did not know. I did not know that's originally how it started. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's the kind of things that you find out when you do historical linguistics, and then you see that these auxiliaries, they usually come from somewhere, and so they used to have a different meaning. I mean, it's the same thing if you think about, I'm going to be there tomorrow. Going to. I mean, to go means like to walk, but going to is used in all kinds of meaning now. I'm going to watch a film. It could also mean I'm going, like walking to the cinema to watch a film, but that's not what it means anymore. But in the past, I'm going to visit my friend would have meant I'm walking over to my friend to visit that friend. But now it just means it's my plan for the future. So there too, I mean, these grammatical constructions, they very often have their origin in other expressions which have a very, very concrete basic meaning, like to want or to go.
The going to future, which strangely enough, it's in the present progressive, and yet of course it describes the future or the near future. And strangely, it's common across the Romance languages, right? French and Spanish have it, I know for sure. And I think Portuguese and Italian do as well. So it somehow kind of co-developed this usage, this meaning across different parts of Europe, which is very interesting. But anyway, on the topic of things we're going to do, Christina, I think we're going to probably end this episode now.
Yes, we will end it now. So stay curious, have fun with language.
And join us next time on Linguistics Behind the Scenes.